Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. Have it ever happened to you that you watch some DIY video and want to repeat it at once, but you don't have, say, a contour paint or primer or modeling clay, and you have to go and search and buy all this, and this requires time and money, and some materials may be even not available where you live? So I've decided to make a video with my collection of recipes for crafting. Some of these recipes I have already shown in my previous videos, some are new, and to make the video a little bit more interesting, in the end I'm going to make a small arrangement using only homemade materials. So the first recipe I'm going to show you is texture paste or modeling paste, call it as you like. Many manufacturers have this kind of paste. They can be rough or fine or flexible. To be honest, most often I use wood putty instead of fine paste to make different textures, but wood putty is not something you have at home every time, so I'll show you a homemade recipe. It's very simple and affordable. In order to make texture paste, you need to mix 2 tablespoons of white glue. I'll make 2 versions of the paste, so I'm making 2 jars at once. Two tablespoons of acrylic paint. I'm using white paint here, but you can also use any other color, then you'll get a colored paste. To make rough or coarse paste, add half a cup of baking soda to the glue and paste mixture. Well, and for thin paste, instead of soda, take half a glass of talc or baby powder. I think you can also use cornstarch here, but I haven't tried it. Mix everything well and you are done. You can make texture on different surfaces using these pastes. The rough paste imitates stone perfectly and the fine one makes smoother surfaces. And of course, it's very convenient for making raised patterns using stencils. This texture after painting stands out perfectly after dry brushing it. And one more trick: with the rough paste you can get a very realistic effect of rusty metal. Just paint it brown and dry brush in a couple of shades of terracotta. The next recipe I use quite a lot, and those who have been watching me for some time know it perfectly well. This is homemade chalk paint. A couple of years ago I experimented a lot with homemade recipes of chalk paints and ended up choosing the one that was comparable at its characteristics to store-bought chalk paints. This is the recipe based on white clay. I'm using kaolin for this recipe. I've bought it online, but this clay is also quite easy to find in pharmacies or in cosmetic departments, because this clay is used for making face masks. I'll leave in the description box links for available options online. So, to make homemade chalk paint you need to mix 1 part white clay. I'll make 2 small jars of paint here, so I'm using teaspoons and pouring it directly into the jars. 1 part water. Water is needed to dilute the clay here. If you pour paint into dry clay right away, you'll get lumps. So I'm also pouring in a spoonful of water and stirring everything well. And after that, I'm adding 3 parts of paint to the clay. In this case, I'm using acrylic paint, but you can also use latex paint for walls, for example. Actually, any good water-based paint will do here. I really like this paint because it adheres well to every surface. For example, glossy plastic can be painted without any primer. It's very convenient if you don't have bonding primer on hand and you need to paint, say, a ceramic vase or a plastic toy. And so I use this feature in my work very often. I also really like to do blending with these paints, especially when I want to achieve a delicate aging. The third recipe, which I haven't shown to you yet, is homemade contour paints. I love using outliners in my works and I use them quite often. Here in Russia, where I live, they are very popular and every local art brand have these kind of paints in the range. But when I began making videos in English, I found out that they are not so popular in the US. In fact, I found just one brand selling this kind of paints on Amazon, and people keep asking me where to buy contour paints when I use these in my videos, so I think this homemade contour paint recipe will be very useful for you. In order to make homemade contour paint, first you need to make applicators. To do this, take durable transparent film. For example, you can use a sheet protector or flower packaging film, cut it into squares of about 5 by 5 inches, twist them into small cones and seal them using sticky tape. The tip can be reinforced a bit with more sticky tape to make it tougher, and it's important that there's no hole on the tip or it's very tiny. Next, I'll prepare the base. There's only 2 components and there's no settled volumes of each one. Pour latex-based construction adhesive like liquid nails or latex caulking sealant into a bowl. It's very important to check that it's latex, not solvent-based, otherwise this will not work. I've got transparent adhesive here. Add acrylic varnish into the same bowl. Here you can use glossy or matte. I'm adding a spoonful and mixing well until the consistency of thick soap cream is obtained. In order to get rid of any bubbles in the mixture, it's advised to add an oily cream here. So I'm adding just a little of Nivea cream, although to be honest I haven't noticed much difference after that. I'll leave part of this mixture transparent as it is. I'm filling a cone, folding it over and sealing the top of the cone with sticky tape well so that no air gets in there. If you want a gold, silver or pearlescent outliner, any eyeshadows you don't use are a great option. I've decided to use these blue ones, they are very old. Forgive me, Estee Lauder from the 80s. I'm picking out the eyeshadow from the palette and kneading and crushing it well with the backside of a knife so that there are no lumps. It's even better if you use loose shadows. I've got a golden one laying around, so I'll use it here as well. I'm pouring the shadows into the bowl and mixing everything well. I'm showing you a slightly wrong order here, of course. The shadows need to be prepared in advance so that the mixture doesn't get dry. Here, as you can see, again, everything is very approximate, but of course, the more pigment you mix into the base, the brighter the finished contour will shine. You can make the base a little thinner in order to be able to add more pigment there. Finally, you can add acrylic paint of any color to make colored outliner. For example, I'll take bright red. This color is hard to find in ready-made contour paints. After that, cut off the very tip with scissors carefully if the contour doesn't come out by itself, and you're good to go. It works just like a ready-made one. If the tip is thinly cut, then the lines come out very fine and neat, and the finished drawings turn out to be voluminous, like with store-bought contour paint. And I'll also show you a transparent contour paint separately. You can make beautiful patterns on glass with it, as well as imitate ice or dew. It's also an excellent replacement for modeling gel if you need to make a nice crust or, say, water in a miniature lake. The following recipe is for those who make artificial flowers. When I was a child, I made artificial flowers and treated fabric with gelatin, but this fabric doesn't like moisture, so best is to use waterproof solutions. There are ready-made fabric stiffeners for that, but today I'll show you a homemade one. It is called Flower Elixir and was invented by a Russian craft master, Polina Kuznetsova. Mix 1 tablespoon of wallpaper paste powder for use with wallpaper which is actually made of paper and 200 milliliters of water. In another bowl, mix 2 tablespoons of white glue and 200 milliliters of water. Let sit so the wallpaper powder swells well and then combine both solutions. After that, leave it to sit for a few more hours and then heat up the mixture well. I do this in a water bath so that it doesn't burn. You need to heat it until the mixture starts to burn your fingers. Cool down, filter through gauze if necessary and add 50 milliliters of alcohol. Here it works as a preservative. Next, you can treat fabric with this mixture. You can do this using a sponge if you treat velvet so as not to wet the pile, or you can just dip the fabric directly into the mixture, wring it out slightly and lay out to dry. The finished fabric holds its shape well, it looks like paper and all that is left is to iron it and you can use it for your crafts. If the fabric came out too soft after treatment, you can process it again. I've used this solution for making jewelry. Fabric flowers look nice on a necklace or earrings. You can also make flowers for hairpins and of course any other crafts you like. The following recipe is in fact my first attempt. I'm going to try it for the first time and in fact it's actually not a recipe but maybe like a life hack because it contains just one component, but let's leave it. Let's call it a recipe though. This is homemade silicone molds. I always wanted to try to make my own silicone molds, although I have quite a lot of ready-made ones. So I've watched many videos with the recipes and chose the one which was named the best. It is as simple as it can be. Add liquid soap to the water. You want to dip your fingers here to avoid sealant sticking to them. Then cover the base with oil or a thick hand cream so that the sealant doesn't stick to the surface. You can also cover it with soapy water as well. Squeeze the silicone sealant directly onto a base or a figure, moisten your fingers in a soapy water and gently press the silicone so that it sticks around the figure. You want to make quite a thin layer of silicone, otherwise it will take a very long time to set. Here I want to warn you, lubricate the figures very well. If anywhere the surface is not smeared with oil, then the silicone will stick and it will be quite impossible to remove it after that. I've ruined this key like that. For some reason I didn't cover the inside with oil and the silicone stuck tightly. I can't remove it anymore. Then I'm going to make blasphemy. I want to warn you, do not do this with Christmas ornaments that are valuable or dear to your heart, as the paint can fall off the base and you can ruin the ornament. I've had Christmas ornaments that I'm planning to repaint. These are my very first and not very successful restoration works. And I had an idea to make cotton ornaments of a small size, like these glass ones, but I couldn't find face molds of such size. They are always much larger, so I'll try to make homemade face molds here. You can make molds like this using small dolls as well. But again, coat with oil well, making a good margin so that the silicone doesn't stick anywhere. I'm waiting for about 5 hours until the first layer has set and I'm applying the second layer in the same way. For smaller casts it will be enough. For larger ones you want to repeat it several more times until the mold thickness suits you. As you can see, despite the fact that it was well smeared, in some places the sealant still stuck to the surface. And this is what happens if the paint didn't hold well onto the surface. Some of the paint stuck to the silicone. I'm going to remove it with acetone. As a result, you get very elastic molds. They are good for epoxy resin since the molds will have very smooth inside, but don't you ever use them for food. They are not for that. Well, the faces didn't come out perfect, but I'm quite happy. They are actually easy to finish. The main thing is I'll have bases now. And the last recipe for today is modeling clay. This recipe is from a channel called Garden with Fairies. I'll leave the link in the description. It has English subtitles and it's very detailed one. This recipe is a little bit time consuming to make. It requires a lot of steps, but the clay is very affordable, so when I need to make big casts I always use this one. And also this clay is very durable. It doesn't break, doesn't crack, and holds very well even outdoors. If you use full recipe volume you'll get quite a lot of clay, so it makes sense to spend some time for one time and then use this prepared clay for a long time. It stores very well in a fridge. For the recipe you will need toilet paper. I'll make half-size batch, so I'll need 20 leaflets of 3-layered paper. Next, you will need 240 grams of white glue. This is about 6 tablespoons of glue. My glue is very thick. In this case, you may want to add an extra spoon, otherwise the clay will come out very tough. After that, I'll mix the prepared toilet paper into the glue. I'm adding a leaflet to the glue, stirring well and adding a new leaflet only after the previous one has completely dispersed. To make the paper soak easier, I'm separating the layers of leaflets. I have a 3-layer paper and paper disperses quicker like that. At first, this is quite easy to do, but towards the end, the mass thickens a lot and you'll have to make noticeable efforts to stir this well. Next, I'm adding 6 tablespoons of wheat flour and 4 tablespoons of plaster putty to the pulp mess. It's very important to use plaster putty. I'm mixing it with a spoon and then kneading it with my hands. You will get a very tough dough. It will knead with effort. You want to knead until you get a nice and smooth consistency without lumps. Further, the author of the recipe advised sending the dough to ripen for a couple of hours in a fridge, but I'm always in a hurry and I do it in one step and I didn't notice any difference. So, right after that, I'm adding 2 tablespoons of dish soap and 2 tablespoons of oil. I'm using mineral oil here. You can also use vegetable oil, but casts can get smelly with time, so I prefer using mineral oil. The dough will become very sticky and quite unpleasant to the touch, so better do it in gloves. But gradually, as you continue kneading, it will become soft and will not be sticky anymore. If it is still too sticky, add a little more oil over your hands. Once you get nice and soft dough, it's ready. Wrap it in cling film and put it in a fridge, and once kneaded, take it out. It becomes very hard in the cold and you first need to knead it again. You will be able to make very nice casts. The clay doesn't stick to molds. In general, I love this recipe despite the labor involved and repeat it every time I need to make big casts and want to save on clay. Well, and now I'll make a project using the recipes that I've shown to you. I'll be using a chocolate container and a Nutella jar. First I'm hot gluing the container to the bottom of the glass jar and then I'm hot gluing the lid from below. This will make the base for the jar. Next, I'll decorate the base. I'll be using the coarse texture paste and I'm covering the container with it. I'll make imitation tree bark. After the entire container is covered, I'm making strokes with a palette knife over the paste, trying to make it look like a bark pattern. I'm applying the thin paste onto the lid and smoothing the surface with wet fingers. I'm adding more coarse paste to the lid sides and also making strokes with the palette knife. This will be kind of a wooden slice. Then I'm tapping lightly with wet fingers over the surface of the paste to get rid of any peaks on the paste. The paste can crack if applied in too thick a layer, but in this case it's even a good thing, the bark will look more natural. I'm making a plate out of homemade modeling clay. Here, best was to make a homemade mold for it as well, but somehow I didn't think of it in advance, so I'm using a ready-made mold here. I'm attaching the plate to the jar using the thin paste, and then I leave everything to dry overnight. Then I'm painting the jar. The base will be dark brown. Here I'm using acrylic paint. There's no need to use chalk paint. I'm painting the top of the lid beige. I've got a couple of cracks on it. You can paint these with a dark color beforehand if you have any cracks to make them look more natural. And I'm making the edge with bark texture dark brown too. After drying, I'm dry brushing the bark texture using grey, light brown, white paint to get a natural uneven shade, similar to real bark. I've decided to make the plate on the jar bronze, so I'm painting it with acrylic. And then I'm adding an inscription over the plate using homemade contour paint. It says "Prophecies" in Russian. I'm mixing a little thin paste with green paint and applying it randomly over the bark and the plate with a stiff brush, imitating moss and lichens. It looks very realistic. After drying, I'm covering the place with a turquoise patina. This is where the chalk paint comes in handy. It's very matte and imitates the patina well. I'm applying the paint and wiping off with a damp cloth immediately. While all this is drying, I'll make artificial snowdrops for the arrangement. I'm cutting flower parts out of white fabric. I'll leave the link to the template in the description box. Here I'm using the fabric that I had on hand, but it's better to make such flowers out of a silky fabric so that the weaving of the threads is not noticeable. But if you don't look really close, it's okay like this. I haven't outlined the parts on the fabric in advance, and I'm cutting them out right away, attaching the template to the fabric so that there are no pencil marks on it. I'm cutting the leaves out of cotton satin fabric. This is the best fabric choice for flowers. And finally, I'm cutting out thin cotton strips for the stems. In general, there's a special tape for this, but I didn't have any and I'll use what I have. I'm tinting the middle crown parts of the flowers with green pastel. You can also scrape some powder from a colored pencil for this. And then I'll be shaping the flowers. For this, I have a rubber pad, actually I'm using a large eraser, and tools for flowers. I have special tools for this. They are very old. I've had them since I was 12 and I made artificial flowers, but you can actually use any metal objects for of a suitable shape, like kitchen utensils, a metal handle of a spoon, and the like. I'm shaping the petals with a thick hook, pressing each petal with it, and then with a small ball. I'm pressing the tips of the petals and then the middle of the flower with it. By the way, there are such balls in modeling tool kits, but of course you will need metal ones so that you can heat them. I'm also shaping the middle crown parts of the flowers with the ball. By the way, be careful and do not overheat the tool, especially if you have a synthetic fabric, you can easily melt it. For this case, I always cut extra parts in case I mess it up. I'm making the veins of the leaves with a special knife. You can also do it with the back of a knife with a round tip. And after all the parts are ready, I'll assemble the flowers. First, I'm cutting small pieces of thin wire for the stems and attaching the middle crown part on top. Then I'm making a hole in the flower with a thick needle and attaching the flower. And finally, I'm taking the strip of green fabric, stretching it slightly to make it softer, hot gluing it to the base of the flower and wrapping the stem with the strip. Also, I'm hot gluing the small leaf to the stem as I'm moving down. At the very end, I'm hot gluing and cutting off the excess strip, cutting off any loose threads, and the flower is ready. I've made 5 snowdrops. They all turned out different despite the same pattern and look very natural, although the stems would look more natural with flower tape. Then I'm collecting a bunch of 5 flowers, adding the large leaves and tying them with twine. And finally, I'm hot gluing the bunch onto the lid of the jar. Then I'm applying more fine paste with a stiff brush like I did for the moss imitation. This will make drops of snow. And the final touch, I'm applying a little transparent contour paint in places, imitating melting snow. Such a jar can become a beautiful gift wrapping. You can put cookies or sweetened sides, or you can get creative and put small pieces of paper with the written wishes or prophecies into it, so a person will take them one by one to know his fortune. I think this will make a nice St. Valentine's gift and hope you like this idea. I hope this video was useful for all of you crafters out there. Please share your favorite recipes in the comments below. I'm sure there's a lot. If you liked my video, please give me a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. This really helps my channel out. Thanks for watching this video and hope to see you in the next one. Bye!